Hello, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. We return from a week off from the UFC, and you know what always happens. I guess I should say I'm Connor Reber, that's Phil McKenzie. Hi, Phil. Was that a hello? We got the last syllable, even though it's the new mic.
Yes. there was probably more emphasis on the low.
Hello?
Like, hello?
We sort of got the echo on the O more than anything, but that's all right. You know, it's better than it used to be. Welcome to Heavy Hands, everyone. We're your hosts. What usually happens, right, Phil, after a week off from the UFC is you come back sort of recharged. You know, you're like, ooh, I'm excited for a UFC card, like a little bit. You know, they could probably feed me some slop, and I would just guzzle it down like, hey, it's good to have the fights back. And they're testing that theory with this Fight Night card, which unfortunately has quite a solid main event between flyweights. Hey, how often do we get those? I mean, truly, when was the last flyweight main event?
A long time ago.
It has to be ages ago. And even
it has to be like, we're talking the DJ era.
Yeah, and even then, he was usually the co-main on a pay-per-view or something. So they've given us Kai Kara-France versus Amir Albazi, an interesting contenders fight at 125, and proving that this is indeed their attempt to bolster the reputation and recognition of the flyweight division, and not merely them just sort of dumping whatever shit they can on whatever Fight Night card is available. They have backed that interesting contenders fight up with almost nothing. Do you think perhaps when Mick Maynard was on Twitter complaining about Bloody Elbows coverage, a little hurt, by the way, he didn't mention Heavy Hands. We also shit on the UFC cards. I mean, come on. Be fair.
We don't have a product which is called Literally Care, Don't Care, though.
That's true. Yeah, I think he was particularly mad at that. It's sort of it's an understood. It's subtext that we don't care. Do you think he was feeling guilty about this card, and that's why he lashed out the way he did and looked for support from his toadies?
I just think that, like, the guys in that position just want grievances. They want people to fight against. You just made their way to lots and lots of money. And, if you were a matchmaker, in some ways in the modern UFC, as it becomes more and more valuable, would kind of feel surplus to requirements, because, as we mentioned towards the beginning of the year, there have been times when it seems like they've deliberately been trying to make the cards as bad as possible. Yet the valuation keeps going up, the money keeps coming in.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to feel like you've got something that you're battling against. Otherwise, it must just feel like you're just getting buried in, like, pillows of money, which are slowly suffocating you.
Yeah. Oh, what a miserable fate. Well, if you covet getting a crying, laughing emoji from one of the UFC's matchmakers, now's your chance. Tell them you like this card. Anyway, we have the main event. On the undercard, I mean, I think what we've decided to talk about is the tantalizing co-main between Alex Caceres and Daniel Pineda. I mean, not a dog shit fight. This is always the case. A lot of these fights would just need a couple of like tent poles to hold them up, right? And they would feel like very acceptable filler. Caceres Pineda on another card, I'd be like, yeah, okay, cool. That's appropriate. But it's the co-main event. Underneath that, again, pretty solid fight, in my opinion. Jim Miller versus Jared Gordon. Gordon coming back from his unfortunate non-win over Paddy Pimblett, and then that very disappointing ending to his brief bout with Bobby Green, to take on somebody who, through age more than anything else, I think is very much appropriate for his level of athletic ability. That seems like a good matchup. And then there's some other shit on the card. We're probably going to pick one or two others to talk about. We haven't decided yet. All we know is we're talking about the flyweight contenders, Kai Kara-France, Amir Albazi, a genuinely good and interesting fight. Phil, what do you say?
Yeah, it's an odd choice for their first main event, because, I mean, Kai Kara-France has been someone who's had a few exciting moments in the UFC. I think he's sort of one of those guys who's quietly built himself towards being someone that people care about.
Yeah, perhaps.
Yeah, in a sort of vaguely Drew Dobery way.
Mm-hmm.
Amir Albazi? I don't know if I would have picked this guy to be the UFC's half of the UFC's first main event for this division in however long.
Yeah, I mean, they clearly think Albazi has something. I mean, I tend to agree. I think he's a very strong fighter. He only has one loss, which was shortly before getting to the UFC. It was perhaps dispiritingly to Jose Torres, who was not a bad fighter, certainly somebody who will test an unpolished prospect. But I think it did have the effect, that prospect loss, if that's what it was, of polishing him. He has looked increasingly well-rounded and composed in the UFC. His striking, more than anything, has gotten a lot better. I wouldn't say it's amazing, but he has clearly gained several levels of comfort and composure on the feet. He does very basic principled things. He leads with the jab. Despite being a fast-starting submission finisher, he tends to build on his striking as the fight goes on and find trickier combinations, trickier ways of entering, trickier ways of mixing up those striking entries with his takedowns. So he's clearly good, and he is now 4-0 in the UFC. Admittedly over some spotty competition. I actually hold a win over Jalga Shumagulov in pretty high regard. I know the guy has not had a fortuitous run in the UFC, but neither has he given any of his opponents an easy fight. He is a very accomplished, complete fighter in his own right. And I thought Albazi dealt with him relatively well. Otherwise, Francisco Figueiredo, it's not the good one. Malcolm Gordon, good in the right kind of matchup, not against a guy like Albazi. Alessandro Costa is a guy. But
yeah,
Albazi has, other than Jumagulov, largely been mopping these opponents. I mean, he's been mopping all the ones you would hope a talented fighter would do that against. And so, yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, here we are. I think Albazi's good. I'm excited to see if he can realize the potential it looks like he has. But it's hard to ignore the fact that he had a reasonably close fight with the one good opponent he fought in the UFC. And just before getting to the UFC, fought another decent opponent who pretty soundly beat him with just pressure and made him look like a mess. This basically is a serious test of whether he sorted those issues. At the same time, should be a solid test of Kai Kara-France's enduring problem with people who just want to take him down and wrap him up. He dealt with that quite well in his last couple fights, much better than ever before. He seems to be getting better, but certainly if there's one area where Albazi looks like he just has a strong advantage on Kara-France, it is the fact that he is a strong takedown artist and a really, really solid submission grappler and a positional grappler as well. Really strong with his rides, his passes, can be very suffocating on the ground. So that's the interest, I think, as a style matchup more than anything. I'm curious to see how Kara-France can deal with that threat combined with the increasing comfort Albazi has on the feet.
Yeah, I mean, Albazi is someone who makes me think something which I happen to think with such increasing regularity that it's sort of becoming a stupid thing to think, which is,
okay,
this guy doesn't really fight like a flyweight. He's big, he's grounded, he's not particularly quick, he is quite scrambly, but he's also he's a functional double leg takedown threat and wrestler. He's much more of a despite the submissions, I think he's more of a position controlling grappler than he is like a back taking wizard. He looks like someone from one of the heavier weight classes, and I think perhaps this is just going to be a way that things go from now on, because as every weight class gets bigger and bigger, tomorrow's bantamweights will become today's flyweights, and what we thought of as being the flyweight meta will simply just start to shift away from the sport. But yeah, I mean, so that's one of my sort of queries with him, is that, like, how does he beat people who are just quick?
Yeah,
because he doesn't seem super quick, and nor does he have like a singular standout weapon. He's not immortally durable or doesn't have incredible power in his hands. There's normally at the upper end of flyweight, you get some kind of incredible athletic gift, whether they've got, they can hit an incredible pace. He just looks like a very well-schooled, very well put together fighter who is developing at a good pace.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, does make this a weird matchup, because that's kind of like Kai Kara-France as well.
It is.
Is that Kara-France is someone who's been able to outclass opponents. He's been able to sort of outskill or outlast them or get to them with moments of a big offense. But he's also someone who's just been kind of overwhelmed by the freakier fighters that he's gone up against.
Yeah.
Notably, it's Moreno and Royval. Royval just hit that screamingly high Brandon Royval pace, and Kai Kara-France was like, "Oh no, I can't do this."
Mm-hmm. And
so yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that I think it ends up looking like it's going to be a technical simmer of a match. It's not going to be the kind of blinding thing that people look at where they're like, wow, this is what I want to see from the flyweights. It looks like it's going to be, I think Kara-France is probably the person I expect to actually have the slight pace edge, just because of like Albazi's sort of patient, as I said, somewhat planted, braced style.
And it also seems like something Kara-France has consciously tried to develop in the last few fights, is more aggression. Certainly much less of a pure counterpuncher than he used to be. Against Askar Askarov, he had to come, tumbling forward, flinging big shots, creating his own initiative. And I tend to agree. I think if anyone's going to be capable of really, I think that is kind of the interesting thing about this for Albazi too, and a question I'm curious how much Kara-France can ask this question over 5 rounds, which is that Albazi has fought. The weird thing about the 4 opponents he's faced in the UFC is that they don't all really seem like flyweights either.
No, I mean, you look at like Costa or Figueiredo. Even bad Figueiredo is still a bit like good Figueiredo in that you're like massive power, durability. Are these really like flyweight traits? But that's why I kind of find myself thinking it becomes a stupider thing to say, like, over time, because
this is just
more and more of these guys.
Yeah, and Zhumagulov, of course, took very much a counterpunching approach. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, Albazi sort of became frustrated with that at a certain point in that fight. He was trying to like goad Zhumagulov into coming at him a little more. I think part of that is that he was not yet. I think he looked better at this against Costa, by the way. Again, I think his striking, his comfort on the feet is improving. His ability to sort of generate new ideas down the stretch, that is improving. Because you can watch the first round of his fight against Alessandro Costa. It's very much jab, right hand, rinse and repeat. As the fight goes on, he starts finding ways to vary those combinations. He knocked Costa down with a 2-1. Just a sneaky lead right hand, and then he finished him with a really nice uppercut, kind of a weird uppercut, but again, showing that variation, switching up his ideas once he gets his timing. But he didn't have that yet against Zhumagulov, not to that degree. And at a certain point, he started trying to like goad him into coming forward because he wasn't sure how to break through. The point is that a lot of these guys have been very counterpunchy. And whether he's realized it or not, I suspect Albazi has benefited from that. Even if he wasn't enjoying it the whole time against Zhumagulov, because the fight with Torres, what really fucked him up was the intense pressure Torres put on him from the opening bell.
Mm-hmm.
He did not like that. I suspect he would deal with it better now, but that is the question in this matchup for me is Kara France going to be willing to test Albazi, to push a pace on him as you supposed? I think he can, but it is clearly still feels for him like fighting against type. He wants to counter. He wants to let people come to him. I mean, I also think he's also just the best counterpuncher that Albazi will have fought, so he could put him back into the position he found himself in halfway through the Zhumagulov fight, where it's like he better hit a takedown at some point because he's clearly getting uncomfortable with just this crafty, patient fighter making him take the first risky move.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I found myself thinking that he needs to make that, that stand-up game looks like it needs to take another evolution for this one to work. Because neither, Brandon Moreno nor Askar Askarov could effectively out-wrestle Kai Kara France in their last fight with him.
That has been a huge improvement for him.
And, Moreno had to get it done with the body kick, and Askarov got tired out and lost. Which means that, and I think as Albazi's level of competition has increased, so has his so has he shifted more towards controlled grappling. We've seen the same dynamic played out with Mohamed Mokaev a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, the more... As he's gotten to the UFC, it's changed from being he's just submitting people to he can't really do much apart from get positions and hold them.
Well, I will say against Costa, I quite liked his approach to ground and pound. Granted, again, not a flyweight thing. Costa got knocked down in the second round of that fight and just held on to closed guard for way too long. He just held on to closed guard. That is not a flyweight approach to grappling. But I liked how Albazi dealt with that. He was punching him to the body. He was very patient, keeping his hands in safe positions, but methodically punishing the guy who was accepting being on his back. But you're absolutely right. He has not been, since Malcolm Gordon, quite so effortlessly just getting instantaneous submissions. I mean, again, Malcolm Gordon and Francisco Figueiredo, these are not particularly testing opponents. These are the two that he has managed to submit. This is the curious thing of the flyweight division is at the top, there is an awful lot of competition, but there's just as much of a roster as they have at 125 now. There's a lot of chaff in there too. A lot of guys who don't really feel like flyweights, who aren't particularly good athletes, which is just kind of what you assume somebody will have to make it to the UFC's flyweight division. So yeah, I look at Albazi, I see a guy who's improving, who is learning to sort of develop striking combinations over the course of a fight, clearly getting better, but it's quite difficult to gauge the reality of those improvements. I mean, I think it's obvious we're picking Kai Kara France.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the other thing I was going to say is that, Kara France isn't... He's mostly a sort of headhunting boxer.
Yeah.
But he's definitely more of a three-dimensional striker and more of a, multi-weapon striker than, again, any of the people that Albazi has been fighting.
Absolutely.
And I don't know how that sort of cautious, planted... 1-2 style works that if low kicks start getting thrown into the mix.
Mm-hmm.
is he schooled enough to like be able to keep that going whilst also potentially having his jab taken away? Like, does he have counters to the counters and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, he hit Zhumagulov with a lot of low kicks. He took control of that weapon dynamic in that fight. But yeah, I mean, Kara-France is genuinely a very crafty striker. He puts together good combinations. He will hit the body, though he is very much primarily a headhunter. He will fire low kicks. And it's in bursts, but they were enough to beat Askar Askarov, who I think is a sort of a more proven version of the style that Albazi is bringing here.
Yeah. That's my general thoughts. Yeah, I think there's a chance that Albazi has the higher ceiling, I think, especially physically.
Yeah.
Than Askarov. But yeah, like it's not a good sign generally when the level of competition goes up and the dynamism starts to fade away.
Yeah. That's not what you see at like the Islam Makhachevs of the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not what we've seen really from Kai Kara-France. I think he's had some speed bumps in the UFC, but he's been looking pretty dangerous and effective. Even in the fight he lost against Moreno, not a bad performance from him at all. If anything, a weird showing from Moreno where I kind of thought Kara-France had the edge for a lot of it.
Yeah, I mean, and that has aged super well because we were worried about Brandon Moreno after that fight, and he's in fact been fine.
Yeah. So I think we'll see a combination.
It's a good performance from Kai Kara-France. Yeah, I mean, this is one of those fights where, like, earlier on in his career, I might pick Kara-France to lose it.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, there's multiple ways in which he's better now. He can hit with power more often, and yeah, he doesn't tire himself out with his own work. So yeah, got to pick him really. Albazi just hasn't had the level of competition for me to be able to pick him. But he is, like you said, he's a three-dimensional and clearly improving fighter. So
he might be a better shot wrestler than Askarov as well. Askarov, I think, is a sneakier positional grappler. But Albazi has shown good timing on his shots. He hits them reactively, but also just seems to have a natural ability to sense the moment. There's definitely the possibility that because the thing with Kara-France learning to come forward more, it's a bit like when like Brad Riddell had to come forward. He's just not as good at it. He'll overswing, and kind of put too much weight on the front leg and kind of hang out over that front leg. There are definitely opportunities for a well-timed shot to surprise him in a way that neither Moreno nor Askarov were able to do. But I just kind of got to see that. And otherwise, I think I'm feeling a combination of him being able to, as you said, take Albazi's pretty basic initiating weapons away with his counters, and then possibly test him and make him uncomfortable by surging forward in bursts from time to time. I also,
and to your point, one of the kids on Twitter, I think it was at Fenox Guy.
Yeah, Fenyo, I think we decided, but we're not sure about that.
Yeah, but I'm changing it now in case we got it wrong last time. Got to cover all the bases.
Very good.
Yeah, it was basically talking about how mechanically nice Albazi's drive on his takedown is. How he doesn't,
yes,
fall to his knees like Jacare or I guess Kevin Lee or like a number of other sort of famous MMA wrestlers.
He shoots very clean, decisive double legs.
Yeah, I mean he's just an oddity. In part, why it makes it so difficult to pick his fights.
Yeah.
As I said, a sort of slightly sluggish, three-dimensional, foot slow flyweight.
Yeah,
is just hard to call. But until I see it, I can't pick him to beat someone who gave the champion, frankly, in many ways, a harder fight than the previous champion did.
Yeah. I mean, that's just the weirdness at flyweight. Because the former champion also gave the current champ a tougher fight than Kara-France gave him. But There's been some ups and downs in Moreno world. Yeah, the last thing I will point out before we wrap this up and move on to the rest of this dog shit is that Albazi also seemed to have slowed down significantly by the very end, admittedly, of his third round with Zhumagulov. Kara France has not exactly been like the most promising candidate for a 5-round fighter at all points throughout his career, but that fight with Askarov was not easy. A lot of grappling defense had to be employed, and I think the obvious improvements to his defensive wrestling showed themselves in that fight, that he just did not tire out. In fact, it was Askarov who felt the consequences of the pace in that fight. So I also have more faith in Kara France, given that this is a 5-round fight that at some point will at least heat up, I assume, to a rolling simmer, even if it never quite turns into a flyweight scramble fest. So, picking Kara France until proven otherwise. And with that, let's take a break. When we come back, Alex Caceres, Daniel Pineda, Jim Miller, Jared Gordon, and some other things. After this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back, folks. It's UFC Fight Night, Kara France, Albazi, and the co-main event, Caceres, Pineda. All right, and we'll be back. This is a cool fight.
It is a cool fight.
It's fine. Yeah. Yeah, I guess I'm being a boxing fan brained here. I'm like, okay, a couple of guys who are like basically 50-50 against UFC opponents. Like whatever. But yeah, it's fun. I like Caceres. Who doesn't like Caceres? Pineda, pretty much always fun. Interesting, crafty, old guy who still retains some of his youthful athleticism. Yeah, I don't hate it.
You know, did you know Caceres has won 6 of his last 7 fights?
Actually, he has been remarkably successful, yes.
I mean, admittedly, many of them against people who are, again, we said this about Albazi, maybe not that good.
Yeah.
In fact, he's somehow managed to trace a, almost remarkably not good path through the modern featherweight division that might be tough for other people. But
a couple of months ago when we were like, oh my god, they found bantamweights, and who are these people? How did they do it? Caceres fought all those guys at featherweight. And you may not think Kevin Kroom is very good, Phil, but Tim Elliott's wife disagrees.
Why is that?
Oh, you didn't hear about that? Tim Elliott.
Oh god, no, is that him?
Yeah, that's the guy Tim Elliott was posting jealous screeds about his wife cheating on him with. Kevin Kroom.
Oh, good job, Bruce Leroy, then.
Yeah, here comes the Kroom.
Get that, adulterer.
That's right, Justice.
And poor friend.
That's right. For definitely, probably very nice guy and easy to get along with person, Tim Elliott.
Yes.
Anyway, enough about the fighters' personal lives. Yes, Alex Caceres. He's fought a bunch of weirdos. He keeps beating them.
Yeah, but he also beat Julian Rosa, and it is admittedly one of those ones where you're like...
Top tier weirdo.
Yeah. You know, how much can you put stock in knocking guys like Julian Rosa or like Gerald Meerschaert out in a round?
Yeah.
This is a classic UFC archetype going back to the guys like, I don't know, Seth Brzezinski or whatever.
Right.
Is that there are dudes where they're incredibly tough, if you don't finish them the first time you land a big punch on them.
Yeah, a 4A fighter, as Zane likes to phrase it.
Yeah. But also just like, it will be really, really hard to finish them in rounds 2 and 3, and you have a really solid chance of losing, no matter how badly you beat them up.
Right.
But if you catch them in round 1, you might just win, and you will look amazing, and you will go on to bigger things.
Yes.
And sometimes it just happens.
It's still impressive that it was Caceres who did it, but yes, he caught Erosa in the round in which Erosa almost always gets knocked out.
Yeah, often by southpaws.
Yes.
Meanwhile, like, Pineda also had like a surprisingly... Pineda sort of had the other way around. He's been someone who comes out hot.
Yeah.
Is a super violent, dangerous finishing threat for a round, and then falls away, like, relatively precipitously. Mm-hmm. But, he finished Tucker Lutz in the second round, and actually authored a little bit of a comeback in that fight.
Mm-hmm. He also outlasted Herbert Burns. Again, I don't know how meaningful that is, but Burns is another guy who collapses, and Pineda did not collapse first. So...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I find this a genuinely pretty interesting one, because it's power and, focused power and submission game against a guy who just, like...
Noodliness.
A guy who just kind of does things, but no one really knows what they're going to be. And sometimes they're good, and sometimes they're bad. Yeah.
Occasionally, Caceres looks like a brilliant boxer, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally, he looks like an extremely crafty striker, and occasionally he looks like absolute shit and just gets knocked around everywhere.
He's looked like an effective wrestler at points in his career. He's looked like a very dangerous mission grappler.
Yeah.
But he's also looked absolutely terrible at all.
Famously nearly submitted Uriah Faber. In fact, there was something weird about that fight that I've now slightly forgotten. I'm pretty sure Faber grabbed his glove or something. I think Faber fouled to get out of a rear naked choke from Caceres.
That 100% sounds like something Uriah Faber would do.
I could be misremembering that, but it's something like that. He was actually doing quite well against Faber and then kind of fell apart after an unfortunate turn halfway through the fight.
Mm-hmm.
So two oddballs.
Yeah, and one of those fights where I kind of have to pick Daniel Pineda because he has a good idea of what he wants to do in a fight.
Yeah.
And tries to do it really, really hard.
Immediately, yes.
And that has traditionally worked very well against Alex Caceres.
Yes. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, and it being 3 rounds, and, the fact that Pineda's actually been, all right in his second and third rounds, maybe not third, he hasn't got that far, but his second rounds of late, means that I don't necessarily trust, Alex Caceres himself is not unfinishable when it comes to getting, panicking in the first round.
Yeah.
It's been a while, but he still does it.
It basically happened against Sung Woo Choi.
Yes.
He's getting completely crushed in that fight. It was one of my most, as it played out live, improbable underdog calls. And I was like, I think Caceres is just going to sneak to Sung Woo Choi's back at some point. And he literally did it instantaneously after getting mollywopped for 7 minutes. So,
yep.
But he got mollywopped for 7 minutes. And it does seem like before Caceres can sort of find his range and his flow, which again, when he does, he can look like a really competent boxer. Does great work off of his jab. Really, really like his lead uppercut that he throws in there instead of the southpaw right hook. Very tricky
very
shot.
Classic MMA lab thing. One of the strikes that he really sort of, I think, basically took from Ben Henderson.
That's true. And I think just a very underrated strike in general. Playing that off of the right hook, the lead uppercut plays off the backhand extraordinarily well, even in boxing. I mean, Julio Cesar Chavez is one example that comes to mind, someone who had a great left uppercut. Yeah, Caceres finds that shot really well, puts together nice combinations. He can move his feet really well once his jab starts working. But, it usually takes a little time, right? And while he's out there being sort of floppy and noodly and uncoordinated, Pineda is probably going to be marching him down, trying to bomb him with huge right hands.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems, I got to assume that might work.
Yeah, I mean, just historically, it's less the question of, is this guy an all-round better fighter than Alex Caceres?
Right.
But it is, do they have one area of the game that they are going to try and execute very hard?
Right.
Because if so, Alex Caceres will simply let them. And, that's something which has sort of happened from, what's his face? Who was the big punchy guy that knocked him out back? Francisco Rivera.
Mm-hmm.
You were like, looking at the pieces of your game, Alex Caceres, you can fight Francisco Rivera and you could, survive on the feet and then take his back and choke him out.
Yeah.
This is 100% a way that this fight could go. But no, he got knocked out in 20 seconds.
Yeah, Rivera just ran at him and hit him.
Yep. I remember the first when he fought Kron Gracie.
Mm-hmm.
People were just like, you know what? Kron is probably going to try and take him down and submit him. And Alex Caceres is probably going to let him.
Yeah, that really more than anything is Caceres' most enduring problem. Letting opponents have their fight, not seizing the initiative. He's just one of these flowy, creative types who,
mm-hmm.
I mean, he very much, he thinks he's Bruce Lee. He is like
water.
Exactly. And I'm going to, sort of invent fighting as the fight goes on.
Yeah, well, he simply takes, he takes the shape of the other person's game, unfortunately,
Yeah.
Water takes the shape of the teapot and so on. He just takes the shape of whatever fight people want to give him. And Daniel Pineda, I think, still on his 100% finishing or being finished career, if I'm not mistaken.
It's something like that. It's pretty close, if not perfect.
Yeah. I think all of his wins have been finishes.
I think so.
This is someone with a very defined way of how they want to win fights.
Yeah.
It's not a one-dimensional way, but we're basically talking at something fairly similar to the Kron Gracie fight with less of a submission threat, but more general well-roundedness and just a more trustworthy fighter.
Yeah, and even then, I mean, Pineda is a pretty strong grappling threat. He's a very powerful fighter.
Yeah.
Perhaps the most impressive thing about that Tucker Lutz fight was that the architecture of his comeback that he built in the second round was Lutz trying to come back from getting hit with big shots by wrestling him, and Pineda finding the front headlock and then just actually starting to kind of crush him and gain top position.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think if I think back, athleticism is obviously another thing that is poisonous for Caceres. And if I think back again to the Uriah Faber fight, this is a phenomenal, a legendary athlete in Uriah Faber, who simply, being Uriah Faber, did not press his advantage quick enough. The combination of being a powerful athlete and somebody who will get in Caceres' grill as quickly as possible, that, I think, is the death knell for most of his fights.
Yep.
Just a point of clarification, Pineda has lost several decisions. The last one, a split decision to Emmanuel Sanchez in Bellator. But he has also been finished a lot, and yes, I'm pretty sure, I mean, except for the ones that are older ones that are simply marked as win, every win with a description on Tapology is a finish.
Yeah, on Wikipedia it says everything is a finish.
Yeah, so there you go. That kind of spells doom for Caceres in my book.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I think it's a super cool fight. It's just incredibly weird guy against 100% finish guy.
Yeah, And hey, every once in a while, being like water works. Again, there's the weirdness of that Sungwoo Choi fight. Should not have been a win for Caceres, but he does find these weird opportunities, and is himself a really potent finisher, especially with his grappling when he gets to a strong position. He's has a range of very dangerous chokes in his arsenal. So
yeah, I mean, he's, you know, there was back when he was first starting to shock people in the UFC when he fought. He had that surprisingly good performance against Kyung Ho Kang, and then he submitted Sergio Pettis.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, if he gets into his rhythm and into his flow, he's a genuine threat for pretty much anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he didn't make it easy on Yair Rodriguez, a fight which I haven't checked recently. Is that still weirdly just not available on Fight Pass?
You know what? I haven't checked.
For ages. It's like a fight we've commented on multiple times because it was an insane display of stamina, a fight contested over 5 rounds in Mexico City, I think 8,000 feet above sea level or something, in which both guys were just spinning the whole time. And let's find out. Caceres Rodriguez. Okay, it's Fight Pass, so I have to put in someone's first name. Okay, it is available.
Oh my God, it's back.
You can watch it. So yeah, I mean that's another one where somebody
fought at a torrid pace.
Yep.
And
against an insane athlete.
Even, and this was stupid, somehow picked up a card.
Yeah.
Which he shouldn't have done, but
it was competitive throughout. It really was competitive throughout.
It was.
Against an absolutely insane athlete who was, even less structured at the time, considerably less structured at the time than he is now, but still.
Sorry, I'm just watching some of this fight. I forgot how funny it was.
It's really goofy. It is. Yeah. It's the fight that Rodriguez had with Chan Sung Jung, but not against Chan Sung Jung. So like all the same decision making and messiness, but it doesn't turn into like a grimy mess because Caceres is out there trying to make art.
Yeah, I mean, it's Caceres trying to be like water. And the shape that he is trying to fill is the silliest shape imaginable because this is Yair Rodriguez at his most unformed.
One of those like spirally yard-long cocktail cups they sell at beach resorts. Caceres being like water poured into Das Boot. No, wait, that's the U-boat. That's a different thing. Anyway, that's the co-main event. Both of us picking Pineda. It is interesting. I mean, this is definitely a fight that I think I would even be quite happy about if it was only surrounded by something more relevant. It's the relevance of the card that is falling short. But a good.
It reminds me of a Pride fight for some reason.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Like a Bushido, a Pride Bushido kind of fight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool little style clash of two fighters whose styles are in many ways kind of inexplicable, weirdly one-dimensional, and yet both have proven to be shockingly resourceful and gotten some impressive upset wins literally in their last fights for both of them. So I'm looking forward to it. More now that your optimism has saved me from the black pit of my cynicism. All right. Let's take one more break then. When we come back, another solid fight, Jim Miller versus Jared Gordon. I mean, also on this card, we have the aforementioned cuckolded Tim Elliott taking on Victor Altamirano. Maybe we'll talk about that one. We were supposed to have, Jamie Malarkey versus Guram Kutataladze, which felt like a mismatch, but I'm down to see a guy like Malarkey be outmatched and see what he can do. I like him because he's so tough and resilient. But now he's taking on Muhammad Yon Naimov. So we're probably not going to talk about that. We do have Eliseo Deleski dos Santos versus Abubakar Nurmagomedov. So maybe we'll make that, our fourth fight to discuss in addition to Gordon Miller. One way or the other, Jared Gordon, Jim Miller, after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Heavy Hands. As promised, we're talking about Jim Miller versus Jared Gordon. I just had to remind myself of what Jim Miller's last fight was, because, Phil, as you said, it was a loss to Alexander Hernandez that, for my own psychic health, I had to expunge from my memory.
Yep. I was able to make that call because I'd literally done that myself. Like, and what did he do? I've just got a kind of vague bad feeling.
Jim Miller's been doing pretty good lately, but yeah, something is haunting me.
Yeah, it's like there's like a sort of black swirling mass in my memory.
Yeah, it's not the tumor. I know about the tumor.
It's like good, and then like just a really unpleasant feeling. And yeah, it was him losing to Alexander the Great Hernandez.
Is that actually Hernandez's nickname?
It was actually. I think he's changed it now.
God, why are MMA fighters so unoriginal?
Mm-hmm.
It's outrageous how often. I mean, I suppose that applies to boxers too. How many sugars have there been in boxing?
Yeah.
Come on, people. Come up with something. We need more nicknames like Pernell Whitaker's. That he had a true nickname.
Yep.
You know, he was Sweet Pete, which got misinterpreted. This is the story anyway. This could be apocryphal. Misinterpreted by a journalist covering one of his early fights where the hometown crowd was chanting Sweet Pete as Sweet Pea, and that just became his nickname. That's how nicknames are supposed to happen. They're organic.
Frank Waston Jr.
Exactly. That's a nickname, right? Bobby Knuckles. These are nicknames. People, out of affection or whatever, apply them to you, and then you're supposed to accept it. It's because fighters get to pick their own nicknames. That's the problem.
Yep.
They shouldn't have that much power over their nicknames. They should have far more power financially, but as far as nicknames go, no. That's a democratic decision. Anyway,
okay.
Jim Miller's nickname is apparently A10.
Yeah, whatever.
Have you ever heard that in your life? I've never heard anyone.
Yeah, I have.
You have?
Again, I forget it. It goes into the black trauma hole.
I have never heard that in my life. Has it been his nickname forever?
I like quite a while, yeah.
What the fuck?
They announce it when he comes out to fights now. They call him Jim A10 Miller.
I've watched so many Jim Miller fights. I completely did not absorb that at all. That is shocking to me. Anyway, A10 versus the Great, or whatever he is now. Yeah, Jim Miller has been quite successful lately. Unfortunately, I think the big thing was that the problem he had against Hernandez in his last fight was partly that, Hernandez is, for all his faults, a youthful fighter with a lot of innate athleticism. He's very fast. He hits really hard. He just had some physical advantages that the crusty old Jim Miller could not match. The other thing is that we sort of know what it takes to beat Alex Hernandez. I think Jim Miller probably suspected what it took and appears to have come in early in that fight with the right idea. And the process is basically Hernandez is going to try to do stuff. He's going to expect you to take turns with him. And what you do is you interrupt his attacks, you counter him, you smash him when he's trying to hit you, and then when he does an awkward reset, you run his ass down and you turn up the heat. And that is what more or less all of Hernandez's losses have looked like, and they've all been pretty crushing losses as a result. He's either in the driver's seat, he's having a 50-50 fight where his athletic ability allows him to win, or he is getting pressured and crushed. And yeah, like I said, Miller tried to come out. He tried to put these long flurrying combinations on him. That is not the kind of fighter Jim Miller is, though. Whether he specifically game planned for that or not, he is himself innately a turn-taking fighter. And despite having a lot of the sort of makings of like an aggressive counterpuncher style of pressure fighter, it has been a career-long issue for Jim Miller that in matchups where he desperately needs to stay on the front foot, he cannot do it. It's just not in his nature. It wasn't coached into him early enough in his career. He falls into his old habits basically every time. I'm thinking, for example, of his fight with, I think it was Anthony Pettis, one where he desperately needed to pressure and just could not make himself do it.
Yep. No, same with Donald Cerrone. It was just like the first time.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a very easy fight to call because you were just like, oh yeah, he's just going to be stranded out of range and that's going to be it.
Yeah. Having said that, I think I probably did not pick up on that and called the Miller-Hernandez fight incorrectly. What the psychic trauma was like foreshadowing itself and preventing me from picking that fight well.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing about that fight is obviously that Hernandez is historically incredibly difficult to out-grapple.
That is absolutely true too.
Yeah, which is Jim Miller's like traditional path to beating people. Basically, is that he'll hurt them on the feet and then finish them off on the floor.
Yeah, he's never been more than a very competent striker. But as far as winning a fight with striking, that requires a level of planning and adaptability that Miller just doesn't have as a striker. Anyway, he's taking on Jared Gordon. I think this is far more appropriate for Jim Miller at this age or any age. Jared Gordon, not a great athlete, not fast, not super strong. What he is gritty, and usually I assume this will be a fight where we will see Gordon try to pressure the hell out of Miller. He didn't really against Paddy Pimblett. I suspect that's because Paddy Pimblett is huge. And he was like countering him. Despite all the success Gordon was having in that fight, he looked nervous the entire time to me. The size, the reach, they were throwing him off, and I think that is why he spent the third round just like trying to bank control time against the fence, because he was like, okay, I've done enough to win, which yes, actually he had. Unfortunately, the judges disagreed, and he tried to basically ride out his advantage, because he wasn't enjoying it. Jim Miller is a short little stocky dude. Jared Gordon can pressure guys like that. I think we'll probably see Jim Miller being tested by the pressuring volume style of which Gordon is certainly capable. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, Jim Miller did not look good in his last fight, and I thought Jared Gordon looked surprisingly good against Bobby Green, a fight in which I gave him almost no chance to win.
Yeah, actually I agree.
I thought he was mostly kind of winning that fight again, but it was kind of Bobby Green not looking great.
That's Bobby Green for you.
Yeah, but, Gordon was closing in inside the reach. He was peppering Green. He was making sure that he wasn't getting baited into swinging, when Green was baiting with his chin forward, so that, Green could simply lean backwards out of the way and then counter. No, Gordon was making sure he was inside, he was following Green's feet instead of his head, basically. And, managed to land quite a few shots on him. Did get briefly taken down, but scrambled out of it. And he's traditionally been, again, someone who's been pretty hard to out-wrestle. And I don't know. This is one of those fights where he's not insulated from Jim Miller in any way. Like, he's not someone who's impossible to knock out. Jim Miller is still able to knock people out. He's not impossible to submit. But most of the time, the people that Jim Miller has tended to beat have been majorly flawed in one of these two areas in his recent career.
That is true.
They've either been very old or very, what's the right word here? Often just very noodly.
Yeah, they leave big openings. Big openings in middle distance. Yeah, and Gordon doesn't tend to do that. I will point out, by the way, that there is a certain level of wrestler-grappler that Gordon does just get swamped by.
Yes.
Joe Selecki and Grant Dawson both took him down a shitload of times. He and Dan Morit apparently traded 2 takedowns apiece, according to UFC stats. But you have to be like a real specialist. Jim Miller, obviously a submission specialist. As a wrestler, I'm kind of dubious of whether or not he can actually surprise Gordon with a takedown enough to penetrate. I think what often happens in those matchups, it is just an athletic thing. Big, strong guys basically tie up with him and overwhelm him and just drag him to the floor. And that's not Jim Miller. So otherwise, I don't know. I mean, I think we'll see a lot of tit for tat in this fight. The thing with Jim Miller is that when he is stuck in a striking battle against someone who pressures him, he's quite a good counterpuncher, actually.
Yes.
Like, this isn't usually a path to him winning the fight, but it is certainly something that has marked a lot of really competitive showings. I mean, I will always remember how tough a test he was for Dustin Poirier, of all people. And there were times in that fight where, he looked like he was getting overwhelmed, but he's such an experienced fighter that if you just walk up to him and bounce a bunch of shots off his guard, he is just going to wait for the opening to fire back and sneak these little shots in the middle of your longer, more aggressive combinations. I mean, I don't know, like, I started this off saying I think Jared Gordon's going to pressure. If he wants to, Jim Miller will let him. That is who Jim Miller is. On the other hand, I mean, I think we are seeing from these recent fights from Jared Gordon that he's doing a good job of becoming technical. Not even capital T technical. Not yet, anyway. It's like early days of the Trevor Whitman process. So maybe he will have that aggression bred out of him eventually. He'll find that he enjoys this more patient style, and he will forget that at times it can be very effective to just overwhelm people and swarm them. But, I mean, I think he built on what he showed in that Paddy Pimblett fight with nice work with the jab, good countering, especially the left hook against Bobby Green, as you said. That was a pretty patient, measured kickboxing performance from Jared Gordon. So I don't know. I think would he not still be wise to pressure? I mean, I'm not sure despite that, if I see a massive advantage for Jared Gordon in a pretty evenly contested range kickboxing match. 'Cause he's not a beast. He's a normal guy who trains hard and works hard and doesn't get tired, but he's not super fast. I don't know. Difficult one to call. This is why it's a good matchup. I mean, it is genuinely difficult for me to call this.
Yeah, I think it is tough. I mean, because, I don't think, as I said, Jared Gordon doesn't insulate himself from Jim Miller. One of the better ways to beat Jim Miller is just to be able to be a okay defensive wrestler, or just be okay defensively and just be bigger than him.
Yeah.
Because, again, he doesn't like closing distance.
Yeah.
And just isn't particularly good at it. The people that he's managed to beat have mostly been, who have been big, have mostly been, really defensively lackluster.
Yes. And Gordon is increasing.
Jared Gordon is pretty small for a lightweight. He's going to be at size parity. Alexander Hernandez was also at size parity, but he's a very good athlete, and Jared Gordon is nothing of the type.
He wasn't a lot taller and longer than, I mean, I think he was a little bit taller and longer, rangier than Miller, but he was beefier.
Yeah.
Hernandez is a thick, muscular athlete.
Yeah.
Gordon is not.
No. And that's the thing. I have discounted Jim Miller a lot because he's simply old.
Yep.
I discounted him against Roosevelt Roberts, possibly against Eric Gonzalez. I don't think I did against Donald Cerrone because I was pretty convinced that Donald Cerrone was absolutely shot by that point. In their rematch, obviously.
Yeah.
No, and like Jared Gordon is so lacking in firepower. I'm still going to pick Jared Gordon. I think.
Yeah.
I think he is better now.
I think so too.
I think if he can beat Leonardo Santos, it's enough of the same kind of threats that Jim Miller presents.
Yeah,
in that we're talking someone who's powerful on the feet, who's a genuinely dangerous submission grappler, but who, if you hang around with them for a while, is just going to run out of gas.
Yeah, I think I'm leaning the same direction. I just think I do think we've seen increasing savviness in the pocket from Jared Gordon.
Mm-hmm.
More variation in defense, like he was genuinely, like, part of how he was flummoxing Bobby Green is that he kept drawing out his shots and rolling under them, coming back with that counter left hook. He did this against Pimblett again. He looked more nervous doing it. I think also, maybe not even just the reach, but like that was also Gordon perhaps in the early stages of a process of learning to box, not just to swarm, but to box. And he still got good results, not officially, but he still got good results with that level of boxing. It looked like he had gained a new level of comfort and craft, connecting defensive ideas together with his combinations against Bobby Green. I think I'll take him as well. It's also the fact that it's only a 3-round fight, but a consistent problem for Jim Miller, basically throughout his career, but especially in these last, how long has it been now since the dude got Lyme disease?
It's getting on for half his career.
Exactly. It's been, a full another 10 years or something at this point. A consistent problem for that entire time especially has been his output dropping. Again, not a problem against Hernandez, really. He did get tired, but he was going for it super hard by the end, but just in a very unstructured way. I don't think Miller is just not a very good adjuster in striking fights. And I suspect that Gordon is, if not there fully, then he's getting there. So we'll take him.
It's a tricky one, and perhaps one that I might not have picked in the past. I think, right. A fresher Jim Miller probably would have won this one, but yeah, nowadays I think I've got to pick. And with how he's been looking, Jared Gordon has been beating looking good against some genuinely decent, if slightly faded fighters, and that certainly fits Jim Miller.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't even know if it's all that fair to call Bobby Green. Bobby Green had been having a lot of really strong performances.
Yeah.
Even wins and losses was, I think.
I would pick Bobby Green to wreck Jim Miller.
Absolutely. Yeah. No question.
A horrific style match.
Yeah. Even now after that and after how he looked in the Miller fight. Yeah. Any point in the last 5 years, I would pick Bobby Green to embarrass Jim Miller. So, Gordon made a good account of himself. All right, well, that brings us to our last one. We only have a little time, so we will just barely touch on it. Eliseo Zaleski dos Santos is taking on Abubakar Nurmagomedov. Again, I don't think they really know what they're doing with Zaleski. I don't know what they should do with Zaleski. He has been incredibly inconsistent ever since that injury and layoff. What was it? It was it wasn't even an injury layoff. I think I'm conflating him in my mind with Ponzinibbio. Because
they both at the same time started looking like gun shy and terrible, and had a weird fight against the Leech.
Yeah. And Zaleski just looking increasingly fragile and unstructured. This is a guy who, what made him the exciting fighter he was his relentlessness. Mm-hmm. That he was sort of a bit like Charles Jourdain.
Yeah, that is a very good comparison.
Even earlier than this version of Charles Jourdain, where he would be completely insanely aggressive, just throw the kitchen sink at his opponent, but would also come up with some really interesting adjustments within all that chaos. But unlike Charles Jourdain, who has learned to pare away some of the chaos and revealed that he is, in fact, just a really fucking good kickboxer. I think with Dos Santos, it appears, I guess they're just calling him Zaleski now, at least on Tapology. With Zaleski, it looks like the chaos was an integral part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And since he became more gun shy, I don't know, has just been difficult to tell what he's trying to do in a lot of his fights. In all of them, basically. And now he's in there against, one of the Nurmagomedovs. I don't know, is Abubakar one of the ones who's actually related to Khabib? I can't remember. I can't keep him straight.
I mean, they definitely know each other.
Well, that goes without saying.
Like, I don't think he is related to him.
Yeah.
He was part of Khabib's crew that was involved in the post-McGregor fight scuffle.
Okay, great. Certainly,
I don't actually think he's related, and he trained under Abdulmanap.
Okay, great.
I don't think he's actually related to him, which must be confusing.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe a distant cousin, maybe just a complete coincidence. I think it's Umar who is the one who's actually a Khabib protege.
Mm-hmm.
Weirdly, Umar is the one who looks nothing at all like an Abdul Manap Sambo sort of stylist.
Mm-hmm.
You get a lot more of that from Abubakar. He's a little bit of a fusion. I mean, he, like a lot of these fighters, I think he thinks he's a craftier, slicker striker than he really is.
Mm-hmm.
But it all works because he is genuinely a relentless, suffocating positional grappler when he has a mind to do it. And one way or another, because the striking is kind of messy, it tends to happen.
Yeah.
I'm just going to pick that straight up over Zaleski, to be quite honest. Who has never had... Yeah, go on.
I mean, I was just going to say, Zaleski's selling point was that he was a fun wild man, who sort of fitted in the same way that people started to fit, what's his face, big silly backflip guy into...
Michel Pereira.
Yeah, into the welterweight division, which also means that he has an almost unblemished string of fights against strikers.
Yeah.
But yeah, his one fight against Nicholas Dalby,
yes,
was when he just got outpaced and outgrimied and outwilled, and I think it was his UFC debut. It wasn't against a pure striker. And again, that was when he was young, athletic, and full of confidence.
Right.
So, yeah, how and why would I pick him to beat a combat sambo champion and someone who's just going to put him in hideous positions?
Right.
If he's looking mentally defeated in the part of the fight that he nominally likes or used to like, how's he going to be in the part of it that he used to kind of hate?
Yeah, that's pretty much my read. Yeah, that more than anything, I think, needed the chaos. It needed the willingness to try anything, to create weird scrambles, and even then, against frankly, a good but so-so wrestler in Nicholas Dalby. Like, you shouldn't be out there getting dominated in the wrestling by Nicholas Dalby. That's not a knock on Dalby. It's just... He is a chronically well-rounded fighter, not a wrestling specialist, per se. And even then, it was the wrestling. I should check the stats. I seem to recall a lot of takedowns from Dalby in that fight. 6 takedowns.
Yeah. Dalby was very much like kind of Court McGee in that way.
Right.
Just someone who's just going to make up for not being terribly good at it by just doing it a lot.
Yeah. So, just given that some chaos is going to occur, that when Abubakar storms forward, Zaleski is going to respond as he has been the last few years, like kind of timidly backing away and abandoning his stance and getting knocked around by shots even that he blocks because he's not in good position. that's going to be enough chaos to just sort of create scrambles. And once the scrambles are created, they're going to end quicker than Zaleski would like them to end, with Abubakar in some kind of suffocating control position, whether it's full mount or on his back or just in half guard, just chipping away. So we'll take Nurmagomedov.
Yeah, one of those ones I would love to see ZDS pull it out and have a return to form like Ponzinibbio sort of modestly has done at points.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this has been booked as one where he's a moderate name who is being sacrificed to the moderate hype of the up-and-comer.
Yep. All right, well, that'll do it for this week's edition of Heavy Hands. I know, not the most amazing fights to discuss. Again, a lot of these are perfectly acceptable fights. It's just you can only have so much of a perfectly acceptable thing before you start to yearn for a little dessert. Next up, we do have UFC 289, which has the sort of interesting main event of Amanda Nunes, Irene Aldana. I gotta admit, I kind of get the joke of Nunes Pena, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not at all disappointed that Aldana has replaced Pena in this matchup. I'm happy to see some fresh blood. I think Aldana...
I'm disappointed. I wanted Nunes Pena 3.
She figured it out. She had to do the one massive overcorrection and then to reveal that Pena only had the one idea. You know, problem solved. I kind of get it. Do you really need to see that one again?
What if Pena learned how to jab from southpaw?
What if Pena learned? Was that the beginning of that sentence?
Yeah, what if she learned how to jab from southpaw?
That's a good point. She switches stance and just jabs with her right hand.
Mm-hmm.
That could have worked.
Didn't think of that, did you?
That could have worked.
Worth the main event right there.
I'm okay with Nunes Aldana. I still don't. I mean, I don't particularly get a lot of drama and sort of visceral interest from Amanda Nunes' title defenses through no fault of her own. I just don't care about the division. But it's fine. I like Aldana. I think she's an interesting fighter. She can be a bit frustrating, but also sometimes she's really impressive with her hands. And she's big. I mean, that, if nothing else, is an interesting thing to see Nunes having to take on. Fortunately, on that card, there is also fights like Charles Oliveira, Beneil Dariush. Fantastic booking right there. I really like Dan Ige, Nate Landwehr. I actually really like Matt Schnell, David Dvorak. That's a really cool fight in the undercard. Nasruddin Imavov, Chris Curtis. Cool fight. It's not the most stacked pay-per-view, I gotta be honest, but there's like 5 fights that are right up my alley, 4 fights that are right up my alley, and then one that we have to talk about one way or the other. So that's enough for an episode. That's enough. And we will certainly have lots to say about that next week. Make sure you come back to join us then. Find us on Twitter, @BoxingBush, @EvilGregJackson. And that's it. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.